It was a special night for James and Maria. Their hearts were filled with excitement and anticipation as they stepped out of their car and made their way toward the restaurant. It was their anniversary, a moment to celebrate the love they had built over the years. The evening felt perfect, the kind of night that had been on their minds for weeks, and they were eager to make it memorable. As they approached the entrance, the bright lights of the restaurant shone down on them, casting a warm glow that promised a luxurious experience. The restaurant was one of the finest in the city, high-end, sophisticated, and exclusive. It was known for its exquisite menu and its elegant setting, the kind of place where every detail was carefully curated. James opened the door for Maria with a smile, his excitement clear on his face. "This is it," he said softly, his voice filled with admiration as he looked around at the grandiose design. Inside, the ambience was everything they had imagined. The polished wood floors gleamed under the soft glow of chandeliers hanging above. The air was filled with the subtle scent of expensive perfume, mixed with the fragrance of freshly prepared gourmet dishes wafting from the kitchen. The tables were set with fine china, crystal glassware, and elegant candlelight that flickered gently, casting a romantic glow over the room. But as they walked further into the restaurant, they couldn't help but notice the glances from the other diners. Some looked up briefly, their eyes following the couple as they made their way past. A few patrons whispered to each other, and James could feel the weight of their stares. Maria, trying to brush it off, gave him a smile, but even she couldn't ignore the discomfort brewing inside her. They didn't belong here in the eyes of some. A young woman, seated at one of the front tables, narrowed her eyes as the couple walked past, her gaze lingering just a moment too long. A few more patrons shifted uncomfortably in their seats as the couple made their way to the host's stand. James tried to ignore it, but the tension in the air was undeniable. He held Maria's hand a little tighter, reminding himself that tonight was about them, not the judgment of others. "Good evening," the hostess greeted them with a practiced smile, glancing at the reservation book. Her eyes flicked between them and the screen. Maria could feel the subtle pause in the hostess's expression as she checked for their name. "Do you have a reservation?" she asked, her voice polite but distant. No," James replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "We're here for our anniversary. We didn't think we needed one." The hostess hesitated for just a moment before answering. "I'm afraid we require reservations in advance. It's a very busy night, and we're at full capacity." Maria's stomach sank. She knew the restaurant was nearly empty when they arrived, but the hostess seemed unmoved by the situation. They exchanged an uncertain glance. The reality of the night settling in, it was more than just a misunderstanding. There was something else in the air. The couple could feel it, but they said nothing. Instead, they followed the hostess down the aisle, pretending not to notice the judgmental glances that followed their every step. The restaurant, while beautiful and sophisticated, felt a little too formal for them. The space was filled with wealthy patrons dressed in suits and gowns, each more refined than the last. The soft classical music playing in the background seemed too distant, too out of reach for a couple like them, who didn't often dine in places like this. They were just regular people trying to celebrate a special night, but in that moment, the fancy surroundings felt intimidating, even alienating. Despite it all, James squeezed Maria's hand. They tried to focus on each other in the celebration ahead, but they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, judged, and perhaps out of place. The couple sat down at their table, still trying to shake off the feeling of being out of place. They both smiled at each other, but the tension in the air made it hard to fully relax. James looked at Maria, trying to reassure her with his eyes. It's fine, let's just enjoy the night," he whispered, attempting to lighten the mood. As they sat down, they noticed the waiter carrying a tray of drinks, gliding past them without so much as a glance. The warmth from the restaurant's atmosphere couldn't quite make up for the coldness they felt being seated. The soft hum of quiet conversations, the clinking of silverware, and the occasional laughter from other diners only made their isolation more apparent. It was as if they didn't belong in the same space as the others. Moments later, a woman approached their table tall, with a neat ponytail and a look that seemed too stern for someone in the hospitality industry. She wore the standard black and white uniform, but her cold eyes told a different story. Her expression didn't match the welcoming atmosphere the restaurant was trying to project. She didn't smile or greet them warmly, just stood at the edge of the table, her posture rigid. "Good evening," the waitress said with a mechanical tone, her eyes flicking from the reservation book to the couple. "Do you have a reservation?" Her voice was polite but distant, as though she was saying the words out of obligation rather than genuine interest. James looked up, his face a mixture of surprise and confusion. "No, we didn't make a reservation. We're here for our anniversary," he replied, trying to sound as calm as possible. He gestured around the almost empty dining room. "It doesn't seem very busy." Is it okay if we just sit and order? The waitress's eyes narrowed slightly. I'm afraid we require reservations, sir, she said, her tone still icy. Our policy is clear. James blinked, taken aback. He glanced around the room, noting how empty it was. There were at least 6 tables, including theirs, that were still unoccupied. It didn't make sense. But the restaurant is almost empty. Is there no way we can just get a seat? The waitress gave him a cold look, as if questioning his audacity. Her lips tightened into a small frown. I'm sorry, but I can't make exceptions, she said flatly. If you don't have a reservation, you'll have to leave. Maria felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She had hoped for a peaceful, pleasant evening, but it seemed the night was already spiraling. She placed a hand gently on James's arm, a silent signal to remain calm. She wasn't sure whether it was the restaurant's strict policies or something else, but the way the waitress was treating them felt wrong. Are you sure there's no other way? Maria asked softly, trying to keep her voice steady. We really don't mind waiting. The waitress, however, gave them another dismissive glance. If you didn't make a reservation, it's clear you weren't planning ahead. I can't help you, she snapped. The words stung, sharper than they should have been for someone in a customer service role. James opened his mouth, but before he could respond, the waitress gave him a quick, almost judgmental look. Maybe you should try somewhere else. You obviously didn't know how to plan for a night like this, she added, her voice dripping with a subtle condescension. There was something about her tone, something about the way she spoke to them that made Maria's heart race. It wasn't just about the lack of reservation, it was the way the waitress had looked at them. The way her words felt like they were meant to humiliate. It was clear now this wasn't just about seating, they were being treated differently, as if they didn't belong in this place. Excuse me? James said, his voice shaking slightly with disbelief. Are you implying that we don't belong here? That we don't have the right to be here? The waitress met his gaze for a moment, her eyes cold and unblinking. It's not about that, she replied, as if dismissing the idea altogether. It's just that a place like this is reserved for those who understand how to treat it. And people like you, she gestured vaguely at their clothing, the way they carried themselves clearly don't fit the standard. Maria's face flushed with anger. It was clear now it wasn't just about reservations. It was about who they were. She felt her blood boil, but she refused to let it show. She put a hand on James's arm, her voice trembling. We're just here to enjoy our evening, she said, forcing a smile. We don't want any trouble. The waitress, however, wasn't finished. Her next words were laced with a venomous edge that pierced through the tension in the air. You're just lucky I'm even considering letting you stay, she muttered under her breath. I'm sure you don't even know if you can afford to be here. Maria's face turned pale. The comment wasn't subtle, it wasn't even hidden anymore. It was a blatant insult, one that made her feel small, worthless even. She could feel the heat rising to her face, but she bit her tongue. The last thing she wanted was to make a scene, though the injustice of the situation was overwhelming. James, on the other hand, was no longer able to keep his composure. He stood up from his chair, his voice rising, but still calm. That's enough. We don't need your help if you're going to treat us like this. We'll leave. He turned to Maria, motioning for her to follow. The last thing he wanted was to cause a confrontation, but he couldn't let her comment slide. Just as they were about to get up, they noticed a few of the nearby customers staring at them. Some tried to look away, but their eyes were filled with curiosity that bordered on judgment. Others exchanged whispers, their hushed voices barely audible but filled with an unmistakable air of gossip. Maria's heart sank. She could feel the weight of their gazes on her, their whispers a silent judgment hanging in the air. But despite the discomfort, the couple refused to let it escalate. They walked away from the table, not making eye contact with anyone, but also not letting the situation get the better of them. They didn't want to make a scene, but it was clear now they were not welcome here. James and Maria stood for a moment, their hearts pounding in their chests. They had just witnessed a level of rudeness and discrimination that neither of them could have anticipated. The hostess's words, the waitress's dismissive attitude, and the knowing glances from the other patrons, all of it had been too much to bear. The restaurant, once a dream destination for their anniversary, now felt like an overwhelming reminder of everything that was wrong with the world. As they stood in silence, Maria's mind raced. She felt humiliated, her cheeks flushed with a mixture of anger and disbelief. She had imagined this night so differently, a celebration of their love, a quiet escape from the world. Instead, she found herself standing in the middle of a restaurant, feeling like an outsider in what was supposed to be their night. The injustice of it all burned inside her, but more than that, she felt small, as if everything they had worked for and achieved didn't matter in the face of such blatant prejudice. James, what do we do? Maria's voice was low, a whisper between them, but the frustration was evident in her tone. James didn't answer immediately. He looked down at the floor, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He could feel the tension building in his chest, the anger rising like a storm inside him. How could someone treat them like this? How could anyone in their right mind believe that their worth could be measured by their skin color, by the way they dressed, or by the assumptions people made about them? He had always known that racism existed, but he had never expected it to slap him in the face like this. Not in a place like this where people were supposed to be civilized, where respect was supposed to be the norm. "I don't know," he finally muttered, his voice tight. "I feel so humiliated right now. They don't even know us. They don't know who we are, what we've worked for. It's not right, Maria." Maria's throat tightened as she tried to swallow the lump of emotion building inside her. She had always prided herself on staying composed, on keeping calm in the face of adversity. But tonight it felt like everything she had been taught about resilience was being put to the test. "I don't get it," she said quietly, her voice trembling. "We're here trying to enjoy our night, and they treat us like we don't belong. It's like we're invisible, like we don't matter." She let out a shaky breath. "Do we just leave? Do we let them win?" The thought of leaving felt like giving up. But it was hard to ignore the urge to just walk out, to escape the stares, the whispers, and the hurtful comments. It felt like they didn't have a place here, like they were unwanted in this world of wealth and privilege. But then, another thought crept into her mind. What if they left? What would that say about them? Would they be letting the system win, letting the injustice remain unchecked? James turned to face Maria, his eyes filled with conflict. "If we leave, it's like we're admitting that they've won, that they have the power to make us feel like we're nothing," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "I don't want to give them that satisfaction. But I also don't want to be here, in a place that doesn't respect us." Maria looked into his eyes, her heart aching for both of them. She knew how much this night meant to him. It wasn't just about the anniversary, it was about reclaiming joy, about celebrating something beautiful in a world that often made them feel invisible. "I don't want to leave either," she whispered, the words more for herself than for him. "But I also don't want to stay here, being treated like we're not worthy." For a few moments they stood there, caught between the desire to confront the situation and the weight of the emotional toll it was taking on them. James could feel his anger simmering beneath the surface, and Maria could feel the tears threatening to spill. The idea of standing up for themselves, of confronting the waitress, was tempting, but it also felt exhausting. They had fought battles before, battles of self-worth, of resilience, but this one felt different. This one felt like it was aimed directly at their dignity. "Do you want to confront her?" Maria asked quietly, her voice trembling as the question left her lips. She wasn't sure if she wanted that. She wasn't sure if she was ready for the confrontation. But the injustice had been too much to ignore. "Do we make a scene? Do we stand up for ourselves?" James thought for a moment, considering the options. They had both been in situations before where standing up to someone meant making a scene. But tonight wasn't about drama, it was about respect, about not being dismissed simply because of the way they looked. He wasn't sure how he felt about confronting the situation, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't let Maria think that they didn't have the strength to endure this moment, no matter how painful it was. "We could," he said slowly, "but what would it really change? They'll probably just ignore us. It might make us feel better for a minute, but it won't make them see us differently. They'll probably just find another way to keep us out." Maria nodded, her face filled with resignation. She knew James was right. Confronting the issue might make them feel justified, but it wouldn't change the attitudes that had already been set. It wouldn't fix the world. And it certainly wouldn't make this night any better. "We stay," she said, her voice soft but firm. "We're not going to let them ruin this for us. We'll stay and we'll enjoy our night. We've come this far and we're not giving up now. Not on each other. Not on us." James looked at her, a mixture of relief and determination flooding through him. He nodded slowly, his anger giving way to a quiet resolve. "You're right. We'll stay," he said. "We won't let them take this from us." With that, they turned back toward the table, trying to block out the stares and whispers that followed them. They sat down once again, the weight of their decision hanging heavy in the air. It was a small victory, one that didn't feel like much in the grand scheme of things, but it was enough to give them the strength to keep moving forward. They were determined to enjoy the rest of their evening, no matter what. They raised their glasses and made a silent promise to each other tonight would be theirs, no matter what the world tried to throw at them. The quiet tension that hung in the air was almost unbearable. James and Maria sat in silence, the weight of their decision to stay pressing down on them. They tried to ignore the stares of the other customers, who continued to gossip in hushed tones, their whispers like needles in the quiet room. The evening that had begun with excitement and hope was now a painful reminder of the judgment that still lingered in the world. Every minute felt longer than the last as the couple tried their best to focus on each other and let the outside world fade away. But it wasn't easy. Just as they were starting to lose hope, the door to the restaurant swung open with a soft chime, and in walked a man who seemed to carry an air of authority with every step. He wasn't particularly tall or imposing, but there was something about his presence that immediately commanded attention. The man was dressed in an impeccable suit, dark and tailored to perfection, his shoes polished to a shine. His posture was straight, confident, but not arrogant. He moved with a calm energy, as though he was completely at ease in his surroundings. And yet, as soon as his eyes scanned the room, there was a noticeable shift in the atmosphere. He made his way toward the back of the restaurant, his gaze sweeping over the patrons, briefly pausing on James and Maria. Then, as though on instinct, his eyes widened, and he immediately changed direction. The moment he stepped into their view, everything else seemed to fade away. The murmurs from the other customers softened, and the air felt charged with a new sense of anticipation. James, still feeling the sting of the previous encounter, glanced up warily. Maria followed his gaze, her confusion growing as the man made his way directly to their table, his expression warm and welcoming. Well, if it isn't Mr. and Mrs. Carter," the man said, his voice filled with genuine enthusiasm. His words immediately grabbed their attention, leaving them both momentarily stunned. How did he know their names? And why was he speaking to them so familiarly? James looked at Maria, his brows furrowed in confusion. This was the last thing he had expected to happen. The tension in the air seemed to evaporate as the man approached them, his hands raised in a gesture of apology. "I'm so glad you made it tonight," he continued, his tone suddenly much more polite and respectful than the cold indifference they had experienced earlier. "I'm the owner of this restaurant, Vincent Holloway. I want to sincerely apologize for the poor service you've received. It's completely unacceptable. Please, allow me to make it right." Maria blinked, unsure of how to respond. The abrupt shift in tone was jarring. Just moments ago, the waitress had treated them as if they didn't belong here. And now, this man, the owner, was acting as though they were the most important people in the room. She could hardly believe her ears. It's okay," James said, his voice cautious. "But we don't understand. Why was the service like that? We were just trying to have a nice evening." Vincent's face softened, and he smiled gently, clearly noticing their confusion. "I completely understand your surprise. I must apologize again. It seems there has been a misunderstanding. You see, you're not just any customers." He paused for a moment, letting his words sink in before continuing. "You two are very special guests of mine. In fact, I've been expecting you." The couple exchanged bewildered glances. Special guests? Expecting them? Neither of them could recall ever meeting the owner before, much less being invited as special guests. What was going on? "I'm sorry, but we don't understand," Maria said, her voice trembling slightly. "We've never been here before. Why would we be special guests?" Vincent chuckled softly, his eyes twinkling with a hint of recognition. I see. You must be confused. Well, let me clarify. I've heard so much about you, James and Maria. You're investors, aren't you? I was told you were interested in a possible partnership with the restaurant. My staff didn't know who you were, and unfortunately, there seems to have been some miscommunication." The couple was taken aback. Investors? Partnership? This was news to them. Maria felt her heart race as she tried to process the situation. She had no idea where Vincent had gotten this information, but something about the entire scenario didn't feel right. They weren't investors, certainly not in a restaurant. They were just here to enjoy a quiet evening together. But Vincent's next words made everything click. "I'll tell you what," Vincent said with a smile. "Let's forget about all this awkwardness. Let's have dinner. On the house, of course. I insist. You two deserve the best service, and I'll make sure you get it. Please, let me personally handle everything from here." Maria's confusion deepened. If they weren't investors, why would he treat them like VIPs now? Why this sudden attention? What was going on? Before she could ask, Vincent turned to the waitress, who had been hovering at a distance, watching the exchange with wide eyes. "Charlotte," Vincent called out, his voice commanding but not harsh. "I need a word with you." The waitress, who had previously been so dismissive and cold, slowly approached the table, her expression nervous. The change in atmosphere had been so sudden that she was visibly rattled. She stood by the table, her hands clasped tightly in front of her as she looked at Vincent, awaiting his instructions. Vincent's gaze was stern as he addressed her. "Charlotte, I'm very disappointed in your behavior tonight. These two guests," he motioned to James and Maria, "are special, and they should have been treated with the utmost respect. What you did was unacceptable, and you know that. I expect better from my staff. You need to apologize to them immediately." Charlotte's face turned pale. The weight of Vincent's words hung heavily in the air, and the couple could see the realization dawning on her face. She had made a huge mistake. I'm so sorry," Charlotte stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know who you were. I should have treated you better. Please accept my apologies." Maria met her gaze, her expression still a mixture of confusion and hurt. The apology was nice, but it didn't erase the feeling of being unwanted. Still, she nodded, acknowledging Charlotte's words. "Thank you," Maria said quietly, trying to keep her composure. "But it doesn't change what we felt. We didn't come here to be treated like that." Vincent nodded in agreement, his tone still firm. "Exactly. That kind of treatment is not what this restaurant stands for. I'll make sure something like this never happens again. I'm truly sorry." As Vincent finished speaking, James and Maria exchanged glances. They were still shaken, still processing the events that had unfolded. But one thing was clear now: their night was far from over. Despite the pain and confusion, they had managed to stand their ground, and now they would be treated as they deserved. "Thank you," James said quietly, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside him. "We'll stay, but it's going to take more than this to make it right." Vincent smiled, nodding. "Of course. Consider tonight on the house, and I'll personally make sure you have the best experience. I won't let anything ruin your evening." As Vincent left the table to make arrangements, the couple sat in stunned silence, the tension slowly beginning to ease. The night had taken an unexpected turn, but for the first time in hours, they felt like they might actually be able to enjoy the evening. The room seemed to hold its breath as Vincent's words hung in the air. Charlotte, the waitress, stood frozen by the table, her face drained of color. The atmosphere had shifted from confusion to a heavy silence that seemed to settle over the entire restaurant. Everyone around them watched the scene unfold, some with curiosity, others with discomfort. It was clear that something monumental was happening, but no one was quite sure what the fallout would be. Vincent's eyes were sharp as he turned to face Charlotte, his expression no longer kind or forgiving. The weight of his gaze seemed to pierce through her, and the crowd, sensing the impending confrontation, shifted in their seats. "Charlotte," Vincent said firmly, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife, "I'm afraid I have no choice but to let you go. You can leave now." There was a moment of stunned silence. Charlotte's lips trembled, her eyes wide with disbelief. It felt like the entire world had suddenly collapsed around her. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She looked at Vincent, then at James and Maria, her face crumpling in an expression of regret. "You're firing me," she finally whispered, her voice breaking. Vincent nodded, his expression unwavering. "Yes, what you did today was unacceptable. I cannot allow this kind of behavior in my restaurant. Everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of who they are." Charlotte stood still for a moment, her eyes darting around the room, desperately searching for a sign that someone might intervene, that this might somehow be a bad dream. But there was no help coming. The other customers sat quietly, some exchanging glances, but no one spoke up on her behalf. The silence spoke louder than words. The waitress's face flushed with humiliation as she gathered her things. She turned to the couple for one last attempt at an apology. I'm so sorry," she said, her voice trembling, barely audible. "I didn't mean for things to get out of hand. I didn't know who you were. I was wrong." James and Maria looked at her, their expressions a mix of empathy and frustration. Maria shook her head slightly, her voice calm but firm. "It doesn't matter who we are," Maria said quietly, her words carrying the weight of the truth. "You treated us with disrespect because of who we are. That's the problem." Charlotte's shoulders slumped as she nodded, clearly feeling the sting of her own actions. There was nothing more to say. The owner had made his decision, and there was no going back. As Charlotte quickly exited the restaurant, the tension in the air remained, but it felt different now, almost relieved. The awkwardness in the room began to lift as the guests returned to their meals, the murmurs of the earlier drama slowly dying down. No one seemed to speak openly about what had just happened, but there was a palpable shift in the atmosphere. Vincent, meanwhile, turned back to James and Maria, his expression softening. "I want to apologize once more for everything that's happened tonight," he said, his voice sincere. "I never want any of my guests to feel unwelcome. This restaurant is about inclusion, and what happened here was completely unacceptable." James and Maria exchanged glances, the weight of the evening still settling in their hearts. It had been a long and emotionally exhausting night, but they could feel a change in the air. They had been seen, heard, and respected not as special guests or investors, but simply as people deserving of dignity and respect. "We appreciate the apology," James said, his voice steady. "It means a lot to us." Vincent smiled, nodding in understanding. "And to make sure this evening ends on a positive note, please allow me to offer you a special meal. Anything you'd like, it's on the house. I'll make sure you're treated like VIPs for the rest of the night. It's the least I can do to make up for what you've experienced." Maria smiled faintly, the tension in her shoulders easing. "Thank you. We're just glad that this is finally being addressed. We didn't come here expecting anything special, but we did expect to be treated with respect. We're glad to see that's happening now." Vincent bowed his head slightly, acknowledging her words. "Respect is the most important thing here, and I'll make sure that everyone on my staff understands that going forward." The couple felt a wave of relief wash over them. They were finally being treated as they deserved, not with suspicion or judgment, but with genuine care and attention. As Vincent left to oversee the kitchen personally, the couple turned their attention back to the meal that had been so disrupted by the earlier tension. Other customers in the restaurant watched the situation unfold, some of them nodding in approval, others exchanging knowing glances. It was clear that they were witnessing something important, not just a restaurant correcting a mistake, but a stand against the prejudice that had so often gone unchallenged. For the first time that evening, the couple felt that the power dynamic had shifted. They had been treated unfairly, but now they were being treated like any other valued guest. As they continued their meal, James and Maria couldn't help but reflect on what had just transpired. It had been an emotionally charged experience, but it was one that would stay with them for a long time. It wasn't just about the apology or the meal, it was about something much deeper. They had come to the restaurant hoping for a nice evening out, but what they had experienced was something far more significant. It was a reminder that even in the face of adversity, standing up for yourself and refusing to accept mistreatment could lead to positive change. In the end, they felt proud of their decision to stay and face the uncomfortable situation, and grateful that the situation had been resolved with respect and dignity. The couple smiled at each other as they finished their meal, feeling a sense of closure that hadn't been there earlier. The tension had lifted, and the evening, though far from what they had expected, had turned into something meaningful. They were no longer just two people in a fancy restaurant. They were two people who had been treated with the respect they deserved, and that made all the difference. As the meal continued, the ambience of the restaurant began to feel entirely different. Gone were the tense glances and the harsh whispers that had hung in the air earlier. Now the atmosphere was warmer, more inviting, and the couple could finally relax, enjoying the meal they had been so eagerly anticipating. The soft hum of conversation around them, the clink of silverware against plates, and the gentle background music seemed to set the perfect tone for the evening that had almost been ruined. Maria and James exchanged glances, their faces no longer tense but soft, with genuine smiles playing on their lips. They had come to the restaurant with excitement in their hearts, and despite everything that had happened, they were determined to end the night on a positive note. The drama had been unsettling, but it hadn't defined their evening. They had made it through together, standing strong, and now, as they dug into their meals, they realized that they had learned something important. James took a deep breath, savoring the delicious dish before him. "I'm glad we stayed," he said, his voice quieter now, as if finally at peace. "It's been a long night, but this is worth it. Not just the food, but the respect we're getting now. It's like the night turned around completely." Maria nodded, her smile widening. "It really did. I think a lot of people would have just walked out, but we stood up for ourselves. And I'm proud of that. I think we made a difference, even if it was small." The couple had felt every emotion possible that night: anger, confusion, frustration. But now, sitting across from each other in this quiet, welcoming environment, they felt a sense of peace. They had chosen to confront the situation rather than retreat, and that decision had ultimately turned the night around. Meanwhile, Vincent, the owner, had been checking in on them periodically, making sure they had everything they needed. His demeanor had softened, his face reflecting his sincere gratitude for their understanding. Every time he stopped by their table, he gave them a warm, reassuring smile, his respect for them clear in every glance. As the meal came to a close, Vincent approached the couple one final time, his footsteps soft on the floor. He paused beside their table and placed his hand on the back of Maria's chair, his voice kind but firm. "Thank you both for your patience tonight," he said. "I can't apologize enough for what happened earlier, but I want you to know that you are always welcome here. No one should ever feel unwelcome, not here, not anywhere." Maria and James stood ready to leave. They had endured a lot, but they were leaving with something valuable: understanding, strength, and a message that they would carry with them. Maria offered a warm smile to Vincent. "Thank you for making things right," she said, her voice sincere. "I appreciate you taking action. It means a lot." James added, "It's not always easy, but standing up for what's right can make a big difference." "We appreciate you doing the right thing, even when it was hard." Vincent nodded, his face serious. "It was the only thing to do. We all have a responsibility to stand against discrimination in any form. I hope this incident serves as a reminder to everyone here that respect and equality should be non-negotiable. I hope you'll come back soon." The couple exchanged glances once more, the weight of the night slowly lifting off their shoulders. They had faced a challenging situation, but they had come out on top stronger, more determined, and more hopeful for a future where people like them would no longer face such treatment. As they made their way to the door, the couple felt a sense of pride. They had spoken up, they had stayed true to their values, and in the end, they had received the respect they deserved. Vincent watched them leave, his heart full. The restaurant had witnessed something important tonight, an act of courage, the courage to stand up against racism, to face discomfort, and to demand change. It wasn't just about serving the couple their meal, it was about ensuring that everyone who walked through the door felt valued, respected, and seen. And as James and Maria stepped out into the cool night air, they felt a sense of accomplishment. They had faced discrimination head-on and come out victorious, knowing that their decision to stay and confront the issue had made a difference not just for them, but for everyone who would come after them. The night had started with adversity, but it ended with a quiet victory. The message was clear: racism, in any form, would not go unchallenged. And by standing up for what was right, people had the power to make real change.